Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unmute Your English channel.
I'm so thrilled to have you here. So, today we're tackling a situation that pretty much all of us have faced at one point or another, and honestly, it usually spikes our heart rate just thinking about it. We're talking about neighborly negotiation, specifically the incredibly delicate art of complaining politely. If you've ever felt your blood absolutely boil because of noise coming through the wall, but felt completely paralyzed about what to actually do about it, well, you are in the exact right place. In this explainer, we're going to totally transform how you handle these moments. We're going from feeling angry and helpless to being articulate, confident, and totally prepared.
So let's set the scene. Picture this, it's 2 a.m. You've got to be up early for work, but right next door, your neighbors are throwing just a roaring party. Or maybe, like a classic scenario from our source material, you find yourself living right next to a really enthusiastic drummer who's just pounding away on a snare drum right when you're trying to unwind. The anxiety of confronting them starts to build up, right? You want to sleep or, you just want some peace and quiet, but the thought of marching over there, knocking on their door and demanding silence, it feels terrifying. So how do you stop a loud neighbor without starting a feud? Because let's be real, nobody wants to make enemies with the people they literally share a wall with. All right, let's get into section 1, the illusion of competence. Why our brains freeze during conflict. Okay, let's dive into this. To solve this problem, we first need to understand what's actually happening in our heads when we're lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, just listening to that bass thump. There's a very specific psychological block that happens when we try to take real-world action during a conflict. It's called the illusion of competence. Have you ever played out an entire argument perfectly in your head? You know exactly what you want to say, your phrasing is impeccable, you sound super reasonable but firm, but then the moment you actually open the door and face the person, your brain just completely freezes up. You suddenly worry about sounding incredibly rude, or you end up stuttering and sounding like a robot. Well, that's the illusion of competence. It's that massive gap between our internal monologue and our actual ability to execute that dialogue under pressure.
You can kind of think of the mind as having two very different spaces. First, you've got the listening room. This is your safe space. In the listening room, you understand the situation perfectly. You're lying in bed, interpreting the noise, formulating your thoughts. It all makes perfect sense. But then you have to transition to the speaking room, the actual physical reality of standing at your neighbor's door to have a difficult conversation. And that transition, that is exactly where everything falls apart. Navigating that specific problem, moving successfully from the listening room to the speaking room, is what we need to figure out if we ever want to get a good night's sleep again.
Moving right along to section 2, building polite word blocks, a step-by-step guide.
To bypass that brain freeze entirely, we're going to use what we call polite word blocks. Think of these as pre-packaged, incredibly simple structural phrases that you can literally stack together like building blocks. Having these ready completely removes the stress of trying to improvise when you're sweating in the speaking room. So, you're standing at the door. How do you break the ice without sparking a defensive reaction? Step 1. You break the ice with, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you." It's so simple, it's polite, and it immediately disarms the other person. It's the absolute best way to get their attention without starting a fight. Step 2, you make the request using this magic phrase. "I was wondering if you could." For example, "I was wondering if you could turn the music down a little bit." Notice how much softer and more collaborative that is compared to shouting, "Stop the noise." And step 3, you give a reason. This helps them understand your situation and builds instant empathy. You simply add, "I have a big meeting tomorrow morning," or, "I'm just trying to get some sleep." You just stack these 3 blocks and boom, you have a perfect, polite complaint. Now, imagine you've delivered your perfectly stacked word blocks. A lot of the time, the neighbor is going to be entirely reasonable. They might say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize it was so loud." If they do, you need to stick the landing to keep the relationship friendly. You simply reply, "No problem at all, I appreciate it." This tiny phrase goes such a long way. It validates their apology, shows that you're reasonable, and instantly restores the peace.
All right, section 3, adapting the approach, formal complaints and escalation.
Now, adapting our language based on who we're actually speaking to is a massive part of effective negotiation. The words you use with a friend over coffee are completely different from the words you'd use if you had to write a formal complaint to your building manager about an ongoing issue. Think about an informal chat. Let's say you're talking to a friend and you decide you're finally going to deal with the drummer next door. You'd probably just casually say something like, "You know what? I changed my mind. I'm actually going to talk to them today." But compare that to a formal complaint. If you're escalating this to a building manager in writing, you need to sound professional and serious. You'd elevate "I changed my mind" to something like, "I have reconsidered my position regarding the noise levels." Wow, right? It sounds super fancy, very serious, and entirely professional. Finding that middle ground and adjusting your tone is a huge tool in your conflict resolution toolkit.
Let's look at Section 4, handling pushback and reaching a win-win solution. Of course, we really have to address the elephant in the room here. The ultimate fear that keeps us trapped in the listening room is, what if the neighbor gets angry? What if they don't apologize at all and instead they push back? How do we handle that without just retreating or completely losing our cool? Well, the secret is to shift our focus entirely away from our own fear and put it squarely onto finding a mutual solution. To handle that fear, we need a specific mindset called the power of yet. Look, if a neighbor gets defensive, it's so easy to feel like you failed the interaction. But the power of yet reminds us that you might not be a master of conflict resolution yet. Every single awkward conversation, every bit of pushback is simply a lesson. Embracing this exact mindset is how we build truly resilient communities, where we don't shy away from setting necessary boundaries, but rather learn to navigate them better each and every time.
When you inevitably face that pushback, your verbal anchor should be this fantastic little idiom: seek a win-win situation. You can literally say to an angry neighbor out loud, "Listen, I want to make sure we find a win-win situation for both of us." By putting those words out into the air, you are actively signaling that you aren't there to dictate terms, but to collaborate. A win-win situation means both parties walk away happy, which at the end of the day is exactly how you maintain long-term peace in your building.
I absolutely love this quote from our source material. Mistakes are just proof that you are trying. When you're standing at that door, your adrenaline's pumping, you're desperately trying to remember your word blocks, you might stumble. You might totally forget a word. And you know what? That is entirely okay. If you forget a word, just use your hands, smile, and try again. The very act of trying to communicate politely, even if it's a little messy, is infinitely better than just suffering in silence and letting all that resentment build up over time. So let's quickly summarize our key takeaways from mastering neighborly negotiation. First, always try to look on the bright side. Maybe your neighbors just have really great taste in music and they just need a gentle, polite nudge to turn it down. Second, take it one day at a time. Seriously, don't expect to be an expert hostage negotiator overnight. And finally, if you want a totally zero-stress environment to practice moving from the listening room to the speaking room, you should definitely check out the Unmute Your English AI and their Telegram community. It's a fantastic, completely safe space available 24/7. You can literally practice complaining to a highly polite AI neighbor who will never ever play loud music. It's such a great way to grow your skills and build mutual respect. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. I really want you to chew on this. How will you view your next awkward conversation, not as a potential fight, but as practice for a win-win situation? The next time you hear that bass thumping through the drywall at 2 a.m., I want you to remember your word blocks, embrace the power of yet, and see it as an opportunity to build your confidence. You've got the tools now to be articulate instead of angry. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating topic today. Keep practicing, stay positive, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Thank you everyone for watching this video. Subscribe for daily updates about real life situations.